This is Steve Zeltzer with Labor Fest. The panel we're going to have tonight is about the struggle and experiences of UC UAW workers and the lessons of the last strike and the issues that they face today, particularly with the attack on the contract and the brutal police assault on workers with felony charges for putting chalk on concrete buildings, and also going to their homes and arresting them, which is a frontal attack on all working people, not just UAW, UC students, but all working people in California. Labor Fest, which is hosting this, is an annual commemoration of the San Francisco General Strike in 1934. To commemorate that and to learn about the history of working people, not just in this country, but internationally. We're an international working class, and the festival has culture, art, music, poetry, and history. And if working people don't know their history, they're the problem. So we need to study our history, learn it, and understand where we are politically and historically. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ellie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. I will introduce myself at a slightly later point. I just want to go over really quickly what this panel is. Steve has already said we have to be aware of our history. And part of that history is also what is ongoing right now in California. And we actually had a big strike, the so-called biggest in academic labor history in the US, with 48,000 workers who were eligible to go on strike last year. And in this strike, some divisions that are very common amongst unions in general have become very apparent. And some of us rank and file organizers of UAW 2865 want to share with everybody how we understand where our power lies and what the lessons is that we took from this strike and how these divisions came about and how we could remedy some of them. And for that, I want to give it over to Samantha to talk a little bit about the words that we're using here so that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, let's quickly define some things here. When we say rank and file, these are the vast majority of membership in a union. These are everyone that does not hold any sort of position. In our union in particular, at UAW 2865, this means anyone who is not an officer, meaning they are a head steward or a unit chair, or they bargain on each campus, or they're part of our executive board, which is our statewide entity that makes many decisions. It has a president, vice president, things like that. That is our leadership. Those are our officers. You'll notice that as we do introductions, that some of us here are now position holders. And this is because in the past 6 months from our strike, one of our lessons was that we needed new leadership. But I believe that all of us were rank and file at the time of the strike. So.
Yeah, some of us even were not in the union during the strike, and we will talk about why they were involved anyways, because solidarity is very important. We hope to have some time for questions in the end. That's why I will try to keep time very strictly. And we also have some concrete calls for action, so please stay around so that we can give you some ways how you can get involved in the end. And without further ado, I would start introducing myself, and then I'll give it over to the next person and we'll popcorn on. I am Elisabeth Koch. I am an international student and international worker. I work as a teaching assistant in the Near Eastern Languages and Cultures Department at UCLA. During the strike, I was the department steward, which is not one of the officer positions, but basically the liaison between leadership and the rank and file members. And I am still the department steward, but now we have 2 department stewards, which is much better because I don't have to do it all alone. And now I'll popcorn it over to Leo.
My name is Leo. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a student worker at the University of California, Merced, and I am just a rank and file member. I actually just finished my first year, so I'll talk about a little bit later on, the importance of getting new workers involved. And I'm in the Cognitive and Information Sciences department on my campus. Let me popcorn it over to Samantha.
Hi, I'm Samantha, she, her pronouns. I am a fifth-year graduate student in physics and astronomy at UC Davis. I am also currently the Davis UAW 2865 unit chair. And during the strike, I was rank and file, but working a lot with rank and file organizing to sort of try to push us in a more horizontal direction. I'll popcorn over to Raj.
Hi everyone, I'm Raj Triklashia. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a fifth-year materials PhD graduate student worker at UC Santa Barbara. Just like Samantha, I was rank and file during the strike, and because of what happened in the strike, I decided that we needed better leadership, so I ran and became unit chair at Santa Barbara. Yeah, and I'm trying to instigate change in the union for rank and file to make it a better union. I'm going to popcorn it over to Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I use she, her pronouns. I'm going into my 6th year as a math PhD student at UC Irvine. And I have previously served as department steward, and also as the Irvine representative for the bylaws committee for UAW 2865. But by the time the strike started, I was just rank and file, and I still am. Yeah, I don't think I'm forgetting anything for the intro. I will popcorn over to Sophia.
Hi, my name is Sophia. I am a 4th-year PhD student in the Department of Philosophy at UC Riverside. I'm an ASC. During the strike, I was rank and file. I was really involved in organizing my department. And then after the strike, I ran for an elected position, and now I am head steward at Riverside. All right, I'll popcorn over to Matt.
I'm Matt Ehrlich. I use he, him pronouns. I am an 8th-year PhD candidate in the history department at UC San Diego. Yeah, the COVID extension, really. I'm taking full advantage of that. I was also an unelected department steward in the lead up to the strike. And during the strike, I was a picket leader and a strike captain. These are all unelected positions, but particularly on our side of the arts and humanities side of campus, that was kind of the decentralized motivation that we all needed. And I'm also a TA. I'm an ASC, academic student employee. I have been for 7 years at this point.
I think Anthony hasn't gone yet.
Yeah, I can go. Hi, my name is Anthony Zavala. I'm a 4th-year undergraduate in sociology right now, and I've just been mostly like allying myself with PhD students and just learning more about it, and also just helping them out however I can. And I don't know who's next, but yeah.
Yeah, Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy. I'm in the English department at UC Berkeley. I'm a grad student worker, grad student instructor for the last year. I was rank and file during the strike, and now I'm the steward of the English department and was super involved with sort of the big explosion in rank and file organizing that happened at the Berkeley campus during the strike.
And Ali.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ali. I was actually not a union member during the 2865 because I was not a graduate student, but I was involved with the rank and file organizing nonetheless because I live in Berkeley and I'm a Berkeley alumni. I worked as a grader, so as a UAW member, while I was in undergrad, and I was particularly involved in the Wildcat strike 3 years ago. I am an incoming grad student in the sociology department, also in Berkeley. I'm sorry, Anthony, that our paths didn't quite cross because you're about to graduate, as far as I understand. So I'm excited to be back in the UAW rank and file. But in the 2022 strike, I was also pretty heavily involved in the organizing on the UC camp on the UC Berkeley campus.
All right, and you are also the one who will talk a little bit about what we think is the character of the movement as it presents itself to us in our campus environment. So please take it away.
All right, sure. Let me just add one thing real quick before I go into that, actually. And it will tie very nicely into what I'm about to say, actually. So I am happy to report, and I'm like, it's a great honor to be here with you, comrades, here on this panel, because even though I will be a first year starting next month, the very next month, my annual salary will be about 5 to 10 grants higher than what it used to be before the strike for the highest paid UAW members. And I have you guys to thank for it. And I want to start everything by saying thank you, with a heartfelt thank you, and a promise that I will fight tooth and nail throughout my grad student years to make it even better for people who come after me. That said, so it's important to notice, maybe this doesn't need to be said for folks who are in this room right now, but this was a working class, a proletarian struggle through and through. Why do I say this? Because during the strike itself, one of the tactics of the union leadership, or as I like to call them, the union bureaucrats, have been trying to wedge an artificial difference between the UAW rank and file, between the UAW members, 2865 members, and other workers who have been either thinking of striking or were on the strike in other parts of the country. This includes railway workers, this includes teachers, Oakland teachers, this includes even other academic workers, such as folks in Colombia, who had led a successful strike just around the same time, or roughly around the same time. And the argument was like, oh, our working conditions are different. We're different. We're different. We're not so different. I want to point this out by putting this strike into a wider context. Look, folks, we're now seeing Hollywood writers going on strike. We're now seeing actors joining them in strike. We're now seeing a lot of so-called intellectual sectors going on strike, just like in the past, industrial workers, or even today, industrial workers, you're more, I guess, traditional proletarians going on strike and employing working class methods to improve their living conditions. Because with COVID, with inflation, with everything else, there is an objective, social, nationwide, or even international immiseration going on. And more intellectual laborers, such as ourselves, are being sucked into the ranks of the proletariat and having to adopt proletarian fighting methods. And this is exactly what's going on. Now, in the past, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, a lot of people, or even when I came here back in 2016, a lot of people were seeing their grad student journey as, okay, I'm going to be here for 5, 6 years, 8 years, whatever. I'm going to be miserable. The pay will be miserable, but I will get out and I'm going to get a kind of a managerial, professional job either in the tech industry or academia or this or that. Now, the academic job market sucks right now, in case you haven't noticed. We're going to move from postdoc to postdoc, and we're going to be stuck in this like position for a while. Tech sector, look at Silicon Valley, it's collapsing. Even, if you're a STEM major, which used to be thought as, well, it's a little bit easier to find a job, they're having a harder and harder time to, get, well salaried, well paying jobs, which, shows us that our condition is not just like a 5, 6 year, 8 year, whatever journey. We're stuck in this position for a while. It's a structural class position that we are going into. And one more thing that I would like to point out is that we're living in company towns, pretty much. All these, little towns, Berkeley, Merced, what have you, they're built around, just like 19th century style. They're built around these campuses. They're super expensive. Everything, like we have to usually live in campus-owned housing. We buy our groceries sometimes here in Berkeley from campus-owned or UC-owned stores. This is a company town. This is a company store. And fair enough, Samantha, yes. And one last thing is that if we go too far in our demands, whatever, in the 19th century, the mining cartels and whatnot used to call on the army or the thugs on the workers. Now they're calling the cops on us, like we see in San Diego today. And yes, I'm not denying that there are differences between, the type of work we do and the type of work, let's say, the railroad workers do. But this is no bigger than what a barista does and what a teacher does. Those are all different sectors, I agree, and there are peculiarities to all of them, but we are workers through and through. And all this talk of the union bureaucracy, whenever there's a union rally, some bureaucrat comes up and says, oh, we love our university. Oh, we feel at home here. Oh, we'd rather be doing our research, but we have to do this because we're not being treated fairly. We want to contribute to our university's prestige. That has to go out of the window. We are workers employed in this company, and the company will call cops on us if we want to defend our rights. And we have to be very, very wary of that. In conclusion, walks like a duck, talks like a duck. We're probably proletarians. Let's never forget that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ali. A quick interjection, because I did not say that upfront, but we are not claiming to speak for the rank and file as a block. We are a diverse group of people with a diverse set of opinions, and we are here to represent our opinions. We have tried to find people from every campus so that we at least have a widespread people of different experiences as well. As you've heard, first years, not even first years, undergrads, etc. But please keep in mind that we are not claiming to speak for everybody. This is just a panel that is not representative. And with that, I'll give it over to Matt and Andy to talk about the theories of power as they present themselves to us.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Ali. I just want to talk a little bit about my perspective on the broad scope of some of the things that you talked about before delving into why that's important for our medium and short-term organizing goals. The first is, as somebody who's written research papers and master's theses on 19th century socialism, I know that the people who often founded and led these socialist parties were the so-called labor elite. They were printers, they were clerks, they were educated, they were university professors, even university students, right? So I don't see any need to make any kind of distinction whatsoever between the typical flat cap wearing overalls, big steel belching factories, and our labor. We are divorced from the product of our labor, and that makes us proletariats. I add one more thing, that although some of us do come from very privileged backgrounds, and have the luxury of saying, well, I'll go to graduate school because I don't need to make millions of dollars. I don't need to support a family. A lot of us don't. A lot of people of color, a lot of undocumented immigrants, a lot of single mothers, small families, all kinds of people go to graduate school. So this isn't just us trying to get a little bit more for the 7 to 8 or 9 years that we're here. This is actually life or death for many of us. One more thing, and this ties into the more specifics as I see it. We are, I think you used the term, I forget what the term you used was, company towns, right? I would say indentured servitude is another example. We are required to stay on campus in order to establish residency in the University of California system. That means we cannot go somewhere else and work a different job while we're researching. We are also divided internally in our union between the academic student employees. Those are the people who teach and who grade. Those student employees, of which I'm one, are on 9-month contracts rather than 12-month contracts. We're teaching classes for other professors. They might be in our discipline, but not always. In my department, most of us teach for the writing programs rather than history. And they're also, we're teaching stuff that has nothing to do with our own research. We have to go do our research during the summer when we're not even being paid. On the other side of campus is STEM. And the divisions here are not as basic as I'm making them out to be, but it tends to boil down at the arts and humanities take the majority of the general ed instruction, while STEM, the majority are appointed as graduate student researchers. So they're on 12-month contracts. They're working in a PI's lab. It is more relevant to their dissertation, but they're still under the control of, a straw boss, of a local petty tyrant who can make or break their career instantaneously. And that really breaks down kind of the tensions that were revealed during the strike with UAW leadership's proposed plan, because our unit 2865, which is the academic student employees, and the local, which was then called the Student Researchers Union, a new union, have very different kinds of aims, very different work conditions, and ended up seeing very different results. For one thing, tactically speaking, the 2865 members who are graders and TAs, for us, struck labor was our main contribution to the strike. Struck labor, however, was not emphasized or planned for ahead of time by our campus or apparently our statewide leadership. And as a result, there was a lot of confusion and missed opportunities in terms of one way that we could really hit the University of California straight in the pocketbooks, which is to say tuition, which is to say the mothers, the students, the parents who, don't want their undergraduates to be not getting grades. GSRs, meanwhile, are very eager to get back into the lab because a missed week means a failed experiment, means the setting back of their career by months, even maybe a year if they get fired through retaliation from their lab. So that's all that I'll say on that particular element of the theory of power. I think what we realized as reformers in the course of the strike is that the UAW leadership had a theory of power which was essentially demonstrative. We're going to go out, we're going to make a lot of noise, we're going to picket, and if the UC doesn't cave, then we're going to cave first. And that was something it was very frustrating from our bargaining team, was saying, instead of dialing back and saying, well, people are walking off the picket lines, people aren't willing to strike anymore, make striking more logical and make it more effective and direct. So I think the concept of a theory of power is something which was not super present in our union, or if it was, there was a very strong disconnect between what the rank and file felt would be effective and what our leadership told us was possible. I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, that kind of leaves me in a good place for what I wanted to talk about, which is sort of like, I guess the first thing in a sort of union theory of power, like what commodity does this industry produce, right? So if you're strategizing as a union about how to disrupt the sort of process of value production, what value do we make as grad students, right? And as Matt was saying, this is kind of under theorized by the union leadership by and large. Obviously, this is the UAW, so it's a sort of, if you read labor history, it's one of these textbook sort of examples of what people call business unionism, a kind of like sharing of managing the workers with the company, right? So the union begins to appear as a manager of the workers almost as much as the company does. So we inherited that, I think, it's fair to say. There's some sort of inability to think this disruption at a certain level, I think, characterized the strike or the lead up to the strike among leadership. But I think basically we can say, what commodity do we produce? I think we landed on something like the diploma, right? It's not the teaching, or at least to speak for myself as a grad student instructor, it's not the teaching every day, right? The university does not really care if the students learn something like on a day-to-day basis. What they do care about is that they don't disrupt this production of the diploma that the student is ultimately purchasing with their money, right? And so because we're not, like say elsewhere in the UAW producing cars or something, a single day is not going to cause a very demonstrable loss of value for the UC, right? It's not like they lose 70 cars every day that we're not working. They can eat a lot of this damage pretty easily when it's just in teaching time, right? Because they're like, well, they'll still get the diploma. There's really not much value that we're losing on a day-to-day basis in a similar way. It's a much more accumulative process, right? It has to be a whole bunch of grades not getting submitted. Eventually, it has to be a whole lot of research deadlines gradually being missed, a lot of funding that stopped coming in. It has to also be, say, accreditation being threatened, right? It has to be sort of school rankings get threatened too. And these things are very decentralized and very sort of asynchronous, right? So a proper theory of power of an academic strike requires what people began to call the theory of the long haul strike. So the problem was essentially, as I experienced it at Berkeley, this theory of power was that the leadership had was not adequate to this sort of concept of the long haul strike. And this has to do with this sort of tradition, I think, of business unionism, but it also has to do with sort of, it's interrelated with the organizing structure of the union itself at Berkeley. So basically how the union regards its members at Berkeley is essentially in terms of mobilization. What our union is very good at doing is turning out very large numbers of people to do things. This is sort of their sort of bread and butter. And it is a useful unionism, right? The idea to move a lot of people to do a single thing. The problem is that this has been sort of elevated in our union into almost a kind of fetish, or like an end in itself. It's like more people you turn out, the better. And it doesn't really matter whether you involve them directly in union decision making, or you really explain or theorize a strategy with them, or you even really figure out what's going on in each department and what the problems are, and how people can sort of theorize their own working conditions for themselves. So this became very clear, and there's a lot of people who sort of, defected from the union sort of leadership staff over the course of the strike who would observe this, that they would say there's a very small, what they would call a leadership layer. Like there's essentially a handful of 4 to 5 people on the Berkeley campus, mostly paid staff, who make sort of all of the decisions. And then even the organizers that are aligned with the union, let alone like the rank and file workers, have really no idea what this strategy is or how it works. So essentially, like, I think the very fact that this is how the structure was built also has a lot to do with sort of this false idea of where their power could come from in this strike. So their plan essentially became to leverage this enormous turnout machine, which is kind of all the, or it was most of what the union was capable of doing, right? It was not really a sort of machine that was built to sort of, okay, sorry, to sort of take democratic inputs. It was built to do turnout, right? So this essentially was their gambit, was that we can do a short strike very fast, and that will pressure people, that will pressure the UC to come to the table. That didn't happen. And so essentially the rank and file, which then exploded in sort of discontent over the failure of the strategy and the sort of clear lack of strategy from the leadership on our campus, we essentially tried to, we've been in conversation with like the Santa Cruz folks who had a sort of hold this more rank and file vision that we'll flesh out in the rest of this thing. They essentially were like, hey, we have to plan this long haul strike, which involves power mapping, which hadn't been done at Berkeley really at all. It involves sustainable striking in the research strike, which perhaps someone else can speak to because I can't do it now. Essentially all these things. So we tried to do them very fast at Berkeley, and we ended up getting a lot of people on our side. But as we'll talk about the improvement section, I think any rank and file strategy in academic unions will have to do this a lot earlier to effectively, steer the ship in that direction, because we were ultimately unable to. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, and with these preliminary remarks, we want to talk about what has to happen so that rank and file members feel welcome in the union, and how we as a union body can actually move the demands into a more proactive and protective space, rather than as it has happened unfortunately last year, into an area where only the majority benefits from anything that happens. So I'll give it to Leo and Samantha.
Thanks. Yeah. Just quick note, before I start talking, I wanted to say my internet has been cutting in and out a little bit. So if that happens and I disappear, I'm very sorry, but you know what happened. And also, I think we're maybe a couple minutes behind, so I'll try and keep this short. I just wanted to say one of the most important things that I think our administration really failed to do is to make sure that they keep on the good side, so to speak, of the membership that is the most like marginalized, and also, has the most to gain from our contract. And on my campus, at least, that was primarily the folks that might have to pay non-resident supplemental tuition, which is pretty much all international workers, and also parents and the disabled. And I think that probably holds true for most campuses as well. And that part of this is just, the general moral point, like you want to support the marginalized and so forth, but it's also a strategic point, because when participation drops in the strike halfway through, that's when the kind of more reactive elements in your union are going to point to that and say, this is evidence that we need to settle soon. This is evidence that we've hit peak power, and we need to make a deal as soon as possible. And the other half of it is that these are the people that potentially have the most to gain. And so there are people that can be easily mobilized by the union and also easily alienated by the union. Throughout the 10 campuses, there's a fairly large disability justice corner, primarily organized by disabled folks. And many of whom are not union members and many of whom are. There's lots of undergrads and other kinds of union adjacent folks. And they are presently super mad at the administration of our union with good reason, which is that we really didn't get any of the gains. Very few gains were made in our contract when it comes to disability justice. And a lot of that right now is concerning COVID and like what can we keep, you know, for example, RTAs allowed to ask undergraduates to put masks on, or to enforce that rule, and other kinds of, you know, COVID related, you know, accessibility things. The other thing is that the UC, especially on older campuses like UC Berkeley, much of it is not compliant with ADA, and they don't have to be because they don't follow under the NLRB. So that's my time. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, in the interest of time, I'll keep this super quick. Strike organizers need to proactively prioritize protecting their membership. You have to do this way ahead of time, and it takes a lot of groundwork and a lot of thought and a lot of planning. Of course, this necessarily requires centering the most marginalized, which, you know, we will continue to talk about. And it also includes careful discussion and examination of the weak points in your strike and organizational structure, and ensuring that you're not forcing membership to be cannon fodder for their employers, right? It's not enough to simply tell workers that, you know, they'll be fine if the UC, or excuse me, their employer retaliates. You know, the union will file a grievance or defend them. The worker is still caught in the middle of that battle, right? We want to reduce how many workers are kind of being used as collateral in this process, right? That your union should be a shield. Workers will suffer, and it needlessly exasperates their relationship with their boss. This might be kind of specific to our UC situation, where your boss is your advisor and you're supposed to have a very close relationship, and they're supposed to kind of set you up for whatever is next for you, whether it's academia or industry. And if you can't say, oh, I'm doing, you know, I'll point to the UAW, not me, I'm just, you know, trying to do my best, then now after the strike, we get all of this retaliation, and bosses and employees really having a strained relationship, or we're having people being retaliated against, dropped from their labs, which can lead to being dropped from the campus, and it's awful. And a lot of these official processes are not enough to protect your workers. So consider strategies that are forward thinking. Consider after the strike, and make sure that you're not leaving your workers out to dry, right? They're kind of the whole point of the strike. And with that, I'll pass it to Raj.
Yeah. So going back to the idea of like protecting our fellow coworkers when we're striking, particularly with COVID. So during this strike, I would, so just a teeny bit of context for it. I got originally involved in the union because I realized that COVID was becoming a big thing again with Omicron, and we weren't getting any protections from the UC. And I realized, oh, I need to protect myself and my fellow lab members. And so I got involved in the union through that. And then I later realized for a few months that the union isn't really doing much about this. So then I got kind of off the union for a bit. And then when the strike happened, I thought, okay, maybe this is a chance to kind of try to bring this back and try to protect each other, even as we're getting asked about the COVID situation. And so I did that. I tried to get people to mask again, and again went slowly, made a speech about like my experiences and all that. And we successfully got like in the indoor portions of the marches, like people to mask. Like we got universal masking for that because of my efforts and others' efforts. And then at an outdoor rally, even though I was masked, others around me weren't, and I got COVID. And I was out for 2 weeks sick and couldn't contribute to the strike. But because of that incident, like masking became even more of a heavy thing in crowded areas, even outdoors at UCSB. So it's like, and partly because I made a big thing out of this. And so that's kind of like a compressed version of like my experience in the strike and COVID. And I'm still trying to fight for COVID protections even now. And that's what primarily motivated me to run as well, and when my leadership position, because of this lack of protection service. And so that's kind of a big thing to me, and I think all of us as a fundamental thing to protect ourselves, because because of, I guess, two major facts. Every COVID infection comes with a 1 in 10 chance of developing long COVID, which is a multi-organ disease that affects your brain, heart, lungs, etc. And with every COVID infection, your immune system gets weaker, making you more susceptible to getting sick to not just COVID, but other diseases too. And if we're not protecting each other from this ongoing threat that our media and government institutions and public health institutions are all gaslighting us into thinking it's not happening, then it undermines our efforts to organize for all the other things that we want, like higher wages and access needs and pops off campus. Because if we're hurting each other by getting each other sick, then when we're sick, we can't organize. And when we can't organize, we can't beat the boss. And so, yeah, so to that vein, what I would encourage people to do is look to organizations like the People's CDC and COVID Safe Campus and what they're putting out. They're putting out a lot of resources for how to fight COVID, for COVID protections, and how to make COVID safe events and to protect each other as we're going through this ongoing pandemic and trying to get our rights. And yeah.
All right. Yeah, we had some good efforts, and unfortunately the time is a little bit short right now. So Raj didn't touch on that, but there were some efforts to include people who were out of state and or were sick and at home. They had options to picket online and support the picket lines and the organizing. They were able to get strike pay, which is big because otherwise you can't go on strike, because how do you live in this society? So that was a good effort and broke down some barriers for those folks. However, that was also not really planned by leadership. One of the main organizers on our campus had to basically do that all by herself with little support, and that was really not good. I just said people out of state, and that leads me nicely into what I wanted to talk about originally, that we have a lot of international workers and international students. And here it is important to mention the word students, because we often try to avoid that, because that's how the university tries to get us, right? They try to use our double status as students and workers and to retaliate against us on the student side of things. And so I'm sorry if something happened. And so the thing for international workers, though, is that we are, at least on the PhD student side, on a so-called student visa, which comes with its own problematic things. It means that we can only work 50% on campus, and we cannot work off campus unless we want to go through a whole process and get an additional visa extension and so on and so forth. So with all of that in mind, there are already huge barriers to being in the US for us. And these barriers do not get smaller entering the organizing space. Because I didn't know what a rank and file member was. I had no idea what a picket line is. I did not know how a strike looks, what the laws and rules and regulations and risks are for me as an international student. And when I, a newly minted department steward, came to our organizing meetings and was asking about that, I was told, oh, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But that's not good enough. You are afraid as somebody who is not from this country and feels like you can lose your visa status at any whim of police looking at you weirdly, you know? So I think we have to break down these barriers. That starts with having clear language, that starts with getting international workers up to date on what their actual rights are, because you are allowed to strike. You are a worker after all, and the law recognizes that. And I think that is the good point to give it over to Jess.
Yeah, so I just wanted to continue the conversation about centering marginalized people in all of our organizing. And I think that a lot of this, at least for me, comes from kind of my experiences having been involved in the Wildcat strike about 3 or 4 years ago. And mean, I'll actually be the first person to say, like, I think that there was like a lot to be learned from the ways that like the Wildcat like did and did not work. I think that like, you know, the messaging was very strong, but one thing that like I wished had been better was a little bit of that communication of risk. There were a lot of time, or not a lot of times, but there were at least a couple times where people were getting involved in maybe more escalatory actions, things that, you know, they could actually reasonably be arrested for. And it wouldn't be, you know, as flagrant as what's going on at UC San Diego right now. And I think that when you're engaging in those sorts of actions, right, not that we can't engage in something like that, right, but when you're doing that, people need to be aware of the sort of risk level that's involved. There was a message in the chat. Can someone clarify what you mean by marginalized groups? Yeah, okay, thanks. People in chat got it covered. But I think that, like, at least for me, being involved in some of these actions, like, I remember there was one action that I was involved in that, like, I had no idea what exactly I was even going to be doing, right? And it was, like, hard for me to assess, like, how safe I was going to feel. And if I was even unsure of how, like, safe I was going to feel, you know, like, think about, like, you know, people of color, disabled people who are, you know, involved, and like it puts people in precarious positions when they aren't aware of what sort of risk level they're going to be engaging with. And if you're part of a more like radical protest, there are real safety concerns. There were times that I was afraid that people were literally going to be arrested because it had happened before at UCI during the Wildcat, which the UC has still never apologized for their police officer tackling and arresting a Black alumna who was not even part of the protest. But, you know, will they ever? So yeah, I think just when it comes to a more escalatory strike, as we were starting to get, even in the UAW strike last year, people were trying to push for further and further escalation as time went on. I think that those conversations shouldn't just always default to, we can't take risks because marginalized folks are going to be involved, but it should center, what do marginalized folks think about this? What would make people feel safe? And there is a lot that can come from safety in numbers, but there needs to be more of a plan in place than just, we'll have a lot of numbers and so everyone will be safe. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Sophia.
Yeah, Ellie, are we at time for this item?
No, you have time.
Okay, thanks.
We have a time. We can crunch a little bit with the question time, so like, don't worry.
Nice.
I have it under control.
You got it. Yeah, all right. So on this point of centering and protecting marginalized workers, especially like during the strike, you need to hear what marginalized workers need, right? So in service of that, you need participatory discussions. And a lot of this is just a general problem of a lack of participatory discussions it seems like this happens on all campuses. It definitely happens at my campus. There's this feeling before the strike and now that there's just a small club of union people who make all the decisions. They're always talking to each other and, oh, come to an MMM if you have something to say, right? So, right, there needs to be, first of all, clear and broadly available information that people can access. Like, you shouldn't have to be plugged in all of the time to have a say in what happens in your union or what happens during the strike. If you're gone for a few days during the strike, you should be able to come back and still have your voice heard. So you need, however, campuses can do this differently. You can have like a live updates doc, all sorts of stuff like that. So just transparent and easy to access information and easy to participate in decision-making processes, right? So people need to know when the meetings are. They always need to be hybrid. There always needs to be notes after, all of this stuff. And who to talk to, And this is especially important because, you know, on our campus, a lot of these discussions just happened like, oh, the staff's here, the little club is here, and then whoever happens to be around like late into the evening after the strike. That's not a participatory discussion. That's not a good decision-making process. And that's not accessible, especially to remote picketers or people who just have to go home and, you know, look after their families. And you can't just have these small little group chats and people just sharing information privately. This needs to be including everyone. And this is especially important for hearing what marginalized workers need. There's this understandable desire to have marginalized workers speak like in meetings or at like, you know, speak at like have speeches at like big rallies or events. And share what they need. Like, oh, well, they should tell us what they need, right? But that often translates to just more work being unfairly put on like a few people who, you know, that they're being treated as tokens, right? Like you tell us what your people need. That's not right. So how do you fix that? Well, you have to have like a space that people feel comfortable coming forward and sharing what they need when they feel comfortable. And you can't just put someone on the spot and put them under pressure to speak. And that really, especially during the strike, right? This speaks to the importance of building your campus community or having good meetings, having a good setup before the strike, that people aren't like, oh, here are a bunch of union people and I'm striking and I don't really know how to talk to them, right? So all this is important to, you know, just being able to gather information from marginalized workers because, you know, it's a hard process to make everyone's voice heard, but with careful considerations on this, you can do it, I think. All right. I think we'll go to the next thing then.
Yeah, and that's a good segue actually, because before we went on strike, obviously we had to make a contract proposal and we already started bargaining. And we only went on strike because the items could not be resolved without that strike, right? So I would like to hear from Leo what we should have done better during the bargaining process to get new employees involved in organizing and maybe the bargaining.
Yeah, so bargaining is a great opportunity to get people who are new to the, whether it's, you know, at a university or any other unit, and kind of get involved without having to take on a task or join an organizing committee or something that they might be a little bit more apprehensive to do. It's also a great place for people to get their toes wet when it comes to kind of inter-union or intra-union politics, rather, within the unit. And I think one of the things that we could have done better would be to rely more on one-on-one interactions, or maybe rely is maybe not the best verb there, but to use those more and to try to get people to organize their units, and people who, you know, work in their lab, rather than just using kind of the union channels of communication, like emailing everybody and posting on Twitter and whatnot. I must say, I mean, I was a first year student, and if I had not actively sought out the union, I would not have known that we had a contract campaign until, maybe I would have known about the contract campaign, but the possibility of going to strike, I would not have realized until the strike authorization vote was declared. And I think that a lot of my colleagues did have that experience, and it wasn't a good experience for them because they weren't prepared. And of course, in different units or even within ours, the point that I'm trying to make is that to do all of this, you obviously need to have open bargaining, so that anyone can show up and see what's on the bargaining table. So on that note, I'll pass it on to Samantha.
Yeah, you know, bargaining must be, you know, as transparent, democratic, and participatory as possible, right? And these are words that we hear a lot when describing bargaining, but like, what does this actually mean? Just like Leo said, membership needs access to all bargaining. We can't be doing closed door bargaining. That's not the move. We need bargainers not to move on items or demands unless the membership is on board. And what that means is that bargainers must be constantly checking in with membership for direction, right? Like membership is the highest authority, huh? So they should be the ones ultimately signing off on these decisions of what to drop, what to keep fighting for, because this necessarily informs and keeps the membership in touch with the strike itself. It's like, okay, if we really don't want to move on this, we don't really have anywhere else to go. So let's go do an action or something to put pressure on the UC, right? That helps membership be in touch with how this labor process, this class struggle actually works, instead of being so disconnected from it and simply made to follow orders, which was kind of our experience during the strike. Bargainers should be synthesizing and amplifying the voice of membership rather than making the choices on the membership's behalf and like bringing them down from on high. You know, in the year of our Lord 2023, there are many ways for us to solicit, for us to gather and organize feedback electronically from a large group of people, maybe during a live stream of some kind. So it's extremely feasible for bargaining, for membership to be providing constant feedback during bargaining and for bargainers to be able to respond to that. You have to plan that out and prep it and put in the work and troubleshoot it before you even enter the bargaining room. I do want to say that it's really important that membership at least have the opportunity to be in the bargaining room in some sense. In a union as big as this and with our workers spread out across the state, that might not mean physically being in the room, but the Zoom room or whatever, that would absolutely mean that, and being free to chat and do it and speak, because you know, like Jessica Freeman said, this is the only time a worker can stand in the room as an equal to the boss, right? Via a class perspective. And you don't want to deny people that.
Yeah, and that is once again a great segue to the next point, because during the strike, when people got more involved and were fired up and came to the bargaining sessions in the Zoom room and were voicing their concerns, then that place to voice the concerns was shut down. And the chat was disabled because it got too rowdy. So where is the participation there? But to track back a little bit, let's start from the beginning and what failed in the analyses that we've already mentioned previously, and I'll give it over to Matt.
Yeah, so as I was talking before, there was a really strong, profound disconnect between what UAW leadership believed was the strength of our strike, which is to say picketing, 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 picketing. And when people start walking off the pickets, because after a week and a half, they're tired, or especially if they are disabled or COVID cautious or out of state, remote workers, there really was not any sort of mechanism to channel that anger and that motivation to continue the strike, you know, beyond wearing out the soles of your shoes. Just an anecdote to give you an extent of how big this profound lack of understanding was. On my campus, UC San Diego, heavily STEM campus, all of our local leaders, with the exception of two, were from STEM field. And midway through the strike, I was talking with one of our bargaining team representatives, and she was horrified to learn that ASEs, half of the bargaining, well, if you count 5810, the postdocs, you know, but a significant portion of the striking members of the union were on 9-month rather than 12-month appointments. She just did not know that. And that seems like one of those things that would have been good to analyze ahead of time. Another big gap, and I'm speaking just anecdotally now because I already kind of laid out the schematics of the different forms of labor that you can expect to see on a university campus. But another example is, I alluded to this earlier, but the arts and humanities often do not have enough classes in their home departments to afford everybody a TA shift there. So in the absence of that, at least at UC San Diego, the majority of us are teaching for the writing programs. The writing programs are cross-unit. Every major, every undergrad, in fact, from freshman to sophomore years, must take one of the 7 writing programs, and they're distributed throughout the college. There was absolutely no understanding or even attempt to use that as a form of struck labor. I was kind of in week 2, like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we, contacted the writing programs and told them, to strike their labor and not submit grades? And I said, I told my friends that, everybody in my department, but like, I don't have any email addresses, any lists. There was just no understanding of that side of campus. And, a strike works only when all of the workers are acting in solidarity. And when you are really misunderstanding and ignoring a large portion of campus, you're just shooting yourself in the foot, and you're defeating it. I want to talk a little bit more about the motivation as well. This is also a thing that we've talked about, and this is a misunderstanding I had. I was under the impression that the SRUs, which is to say the predominantly STEM graduate student researchers who weren't teaching, I was under the impression for a while that they had it good, that they were scabbing, they were eager to go back to work because their vision of the, next 5 or 6 years of their graduate career ended in $100,000, a 6-figure tech position. It turns out I was wrong, and that the STEM field has just the same kinds of struggles as the arts and humanities. But there was just, by the time when the shit really started hitting the fan and our bargaining team was giving things up, the conversation had already lost all possibility of being productive, because everybody was in their kind of defensive corner and trying to get what they could to salvage the situation. The last thing I'll say about this is I could not agree. I think it was Sophia or Samantha. I think it was Samantha who said this, that, in the year of our Lord, 2023, there's just no excuse for not having a really sophisticated way to map power. And the rank and file statewide spent the vast majority of the strike. Once it became clear that our struck labor of withholding grades and our relatively smaller numbers in comparison with computer science chanting around at their pickets, I'm coming to an end. We're very intelligent workers. We're computer scientists. We can figure out these sorts of polls. But the rank and file who were putting this together were told that the poll couldn't be trusted, that it would take too long to send it statewide, and all these excuses. We finally had, at a really crucial point in the strike, a campus OC at the end of the day, where everybody was really fired up because of the bargaining team insisting that we had to call it and settle for whatever we could get. And we said no. Something like 75% of the departments, all the arts and humanities, sociology, and even many of the STEM said, this is enough. We can't settle for anything less than this. And we pushed back on it. It was not friendly. It was not happy. But the bargaining team, I guess, took that message back to the statewide bargaining team, and we were able to reject that iteration of the contract proposal and push it into mediation. Thank you.
I have to say, Ellie, your "please come to an end" message is just like a little bit ominous. I'm like, and I want to note that what Matt was talking about with this disconnect between like STEM and humanities, I gotta say, during the strike, I met so many people that I don't think I would have ever crossed paths with otherwise, from a wide variety of departments. I mean, in fact, I did a lot of organizing with specifically the humanities departments who have really felt kind of shut out during the strike, and building these relationships is really great. And I wonder, why have we not done that during just normal times without a strike? Why are we not doing this all the time, right? It's a little silly. I want to note that the stronger your demands are, the longer a strike will need to go to achieve them. I guess, notwithstanding very specific cases, you need to last a while. That's the whole point. This is class warfare. It can be a war of attrition, right? You're literally trying to be, you want to be prepared for how long this strike can go for. You want to pace yourself. You want to ensure that your membership is taken care of. whether that means food, housing, mental things like their stress, the feelings of isolation, exhaustion, things like that. The little things here really matter. You have to remember that this is class warfare, that your employer is prepared to allow your membership to literally starve. I think there was like some headlines earlier during like the writer/actors guild strike where some exec somewhere was like, we're gonna wait till people lose their houses. Yeah, man, that's what it is. That's what it is every time. And you have to be ready for that if you're going to be organizing a strike. That's your responsibility. It's your job to shelter them in every sense of the word. Takes a lot of work.
Yeah, and these long strikes also require a engaged membership, and Jess wanted to talk a little bit about what problems can occur there.
Yeah, so with engaging membership, at least at UCI, we had basically started from like 3 kind of like main pickets kind of around. UCI is like a big circle, so we were kind of like all at like 3 different points along this major circle. And as the weeks go on with many strikes, like you start to lose people, and so eventually we did come down to really just like 2 pickets, and then really just to like 1 picket, and kind of like the final weeks of the strike. But a lot of times, like as time was going on as well, I think somebody was saying in the chat, there was kind of this increase in a push for like more disruptive actions. And one of them that I actually really liked at UCI was like Irvine is just such a weird like dystopian place in general, like the city of Irvine, not even just the campus, but like because the whole city is owned by the Irvine company. And I wish that were a joke, but it's like this major like real estate company that like owns the city, and like all of the like the housing, the apartments, the retail, like everything.
A literal company town.
Yeah, no, a literal company town, and like is genuinely the reason that UCI even exists, because they wanted a UC in Irvine, and so they sold all of this land to the UC for $1. But so that's kind of like the backstory. And the CEO of the Irvine company lives nearby. We found out that he lives on a private island that has a single road to a gate with an armed guard. But it's like this island off of Newport Beach, which is like 15 minutes of a drive away. And so what we decided was that we were going to have a protest by kayaking out to his island, holding picket signs. And like that is a disruptive action. That is radical. That is like, you have to be willing to commit to, I'm about to go get on a kayak to circumvent this armed guard protecting like one of the, like he's a literal billionaire, and like it's radical, it's disruptive, but there weren't a lot of people who showed up to it, right? Because it's a big ask. It is scary. Like anytime that you're trying to take a more disruptive action, if you're not familiar with taking more radical and disruptive actions, it's harder to get people on board. So if you're going to try to make this push later on in a strike for something more disruptive, people who are willing to take arrests, things like that, right? Size is the name of the game with a strike, right? You need more and more people involved, even if it is going to be a radical disruption, right? The more people you can get involved, the better. And it's just not something that you can start like 4 or 5 weeks into a strike, right? You have to ease people in to taking on these sort of like more like just punching at the status quo, right? Maybe first it's like a sit-in during week 1, and you're like, are we allowed to do that, right? Like some people might feel a little bit iffy, but like, baby's first sit-in during the first week, and they're like, oh wait, we didn't get arrested, we're all safe, we had each other's backs, it's fine. Then you can keep a few more people when you start to escalate a bit further, but it's not something that you can put towards the end of a strike when you're starting to lose those numbers and that people power.
So
so kind of building off what Jess was just saying, we realized, so it was like a very small group of rank and file people on our picket who were just like, why aren't we like targeting delivery why aren't we doing delivery pickets, right? We did a few of them. We targeted a few major intersections to stop Teamsters, to stop ABF trucks, things like that, when we were doing these big marches. But a lot of these deliveries happen in the morning, way before we actually got everyone out. So a few of us got together and were like, well, we could focus more on these economically disruptive activities. We can, because, you know, there is our big picket presence, and that's somewhat important. But like Matt was saying earlier with this demonstrative theory of power, that's kind of, that's not the only thing. That's not our main source of power. Our main source of power is withholding our labor. But during a strike, you can actually really be a thorn in your employer's side. So we really focused in on construction pickets and delivery pickets. And these were pretty great because they're effective with just a handful of people. Like I could turn people away with just me. Like that worked. I just needed a picket sign, march back and forth, and that was it. So these were somewhat taxing, right? Like we were out in the sun, it's Riverside, even that time of year, it's hot. So you got to check in on your workers, swap people out. That was a whole system we had to set up, especially construction pickets. We got out there at like 4 a.m. But if you can have just a handful of people who are willing to do this, and you'll have quite a bit of buy-in, because some people are like, yeah, I want to shut down that big School of Medicine building. I definitely want to shut down the economics building that they're constructing on campus, right? You communicate on that, you make a plan. We did some like scoping out, like surveillance, like where are these deliveries coming in, right? In order to just do these more economically disruptive actions. We saw a cop car, not even UCPD, but Riverside Police making deliveries to one of the campus buildings, because we were pretty pleased about that. But right, this is just, they have to work around us. So these sorts of targeted economically disruptive actions, you know, people think that they're too taxing, too boring, but they really get some people fired up. There were also these more risky directed actions we took. So we occupied UC PATH, which is like the main payroll office for all of the UCs. We only ended up getting 7 people that we occupied the building for 4 days. And again, that's taxing, it's risky. We, did all of the, you're ready to be arrested, this is what you do, right? Gotta have people's numbers like written on your arm, all this stuff, right? So of course, very risky. And just like we've been talking about, you have to make people aware of the risks. But if you can manage to do that, it can be a really important action apart from just having this big visible picket. Like that's not the only thing you can do on a picket line. And also in doing this, I thought a really cool thing that came out of it was all of the solidarity we built with other unions, right? Like we had conversations with people in other unions who, some of them were annoyed, obviously. They were just like, I'm passing your picket line, I don't care, right? But a lot of people were extremely excited, gave us their numbers, said like, hey, if you need guys, we'll send some guys out for you guys. Like it was great, right? So we built these contacts, we understood more about the local unions in the area who worked on our campus. So, building these contacts and solidarity were really important for us on the picket line, and we've taken that past. So yeah, it's just a matter of figuring out where our power lies, where our disruption lies.
Yeah, for like UC Berkeley, also just want to say like love hearing about what happened at UC Riverside. I used to go there. I transferred from UC Riverside actually too. So definitely hearing good things happening over there. Something about like solidarity definitely at UC Berkeley was like the language used, because like students at first were kind of like not understanding like why it was important, and I feel like having like clear communication with like the undergrad students and the graduate students like about why it's so important and like why their strugglers are going. So sometimes like the terms that people would use like would go over their heads, and then they would be like so confused about like what's actually going on. They'd be like, oh, that doesn't sound that hard or whatever. But honestly, them just like understanding like what is actually happening and hearing like, like personal stories that some graduate students that they were dealing with on the strikes, like people were mentioning about like parents, and people of color, people with disabilities, dealing with all these different things. And like the language I feel like used with these stories that they told us, like really made people want to like help along with them and just like move with the strikes. And yeah, I'm gonna keep that short though, but yeah.
Yeah, and with that, we return a little bit to how can we more effectively organize the strike, and Raj talk a little bit about the buy-in and other strategies that we could use.
Yeah, so towards like the tail end of his strike, after I got better and was able to come back, I met up with a few other GSRs who were trying to think about how we could actually do a long haul strike if we needed to, and we realized and that this was an idea that other GSRs at other UCs were also thinking about too, and it's called work to rule. And we realized a few key things. One, the relationship between GSRs and their bosses is fundamentally different to the relationship between TAs and their bosses, in the sense that like for a TA, they might not have the same boss like every quarter, but for a GSR, like their PhD is dependent on how their relationship with their boss is for like their whole like 5 to 7 years. Uh, and so because of that like fundamental difference, a lot of GSRs were not very willing to keep going on strike for too long. And we're dropping off the picket line. And we thought, but this doesn't have to happen. Is this really happening just because we're saying, oh, you have to withhold all labor? We realized there's actually way like it's a very difficult thing to distinguish, but because academic like work is like very, or research work has only recently been like become like a, I guess, recognized as a labor slash work thing that's a contract. And with it, like the distinction between like what is like what you do as a student, as a grad student, versus what you do as a researcher, like as work, hasn't really been clearly defined. And that issue, I think, is like we thought was at like the fundamental root of this problem. Is like, oh, people can't make progress towards their degrees because the educational part of that versus the research work, actual labor, is not like it's all entangled in like this blob. And so we try to think of ways to like get around this, to like get people to be willing to like withhold labor for long periods of time for a long haul strike. And we thought about and through discussions with like labor lawyers and even some union staff, just to get info from them, we realized that actually the UAW is obligated to protect workers if we decide to work only 20 hours a week, because we're only contractually like paid for 20 hours a week, like because we're 50% paid. And so we realized, okay, we could maybe build infrastructure on this. Maybe we can uh, like uh, get the UAW to like make this into a big thing, except we couldn't do that because they weren't willing to entertain that idea. And in fact, this was one major issue with the strike, is that we realized that this had been brought up before earlier on in the strike, but the conversation had gotten like snuffed out. And so it's like by the time we were close to the like end point where we were getting a contract to vote on was when we realized this stuff. And it was like, well, we don't really have much time to get pressed on this. We did do a meeting about like where we introduced the idea to grad student work researchers, and interestingly, a lot of people who weren't willing to go long haul switched from no's to maybes if it was for work to rule. And I feel like those maybes could turn to yeses if we had more infrastructure and more like, I guess, made it a more established thing rather than like an idea. And I feel like in order to make it into a more established things, it needs like a few key things. Like first, what is research work versus what is like academic work, making that distinction clear. Second, the whole thing with 20 hours, like, oh, have timesheets, have like this whole thing where you have many people like doing this for protection of like everyone who's doing it. And third, like having like conversations with PIs, having conversations with the departments, being able to figure out what they think is like academic versus research work, and like figuring it, getting these relationships and conversations going so that way we can make this a safer thing. And I think ultimately the advantages are huge, because if you have like some group of people like fully withholding all of our labor, that's huge. That hugely that affects the UC. But if you have many more who are like withholding some labor, like 20 hours a week, that slows down everything by a lot, since researchers typically work like 50 hours a week. And so if you have many more people who like are able to withhold some amount of labor, that still has a huge effect, which can go for many months. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. And with that, I want to give it over to Ali, because we have found that there was a lot of discontent with how this all went down. And there was not really an option to make this discontent heard, and to follow up on it. So what do we do in these cases, and how can we actually challenge the people who describe themselves as leadership?
Okay, so I guess, there are good news and bad news. The bad news is we have been talking about all the things that we had a lot of discontent with throughout the strike, and we're trying to, take stock of what went wrong and what could have been better. I guess the bad news is the union leadership, and I want to emphasize this, I like to call them the union bureaucrats, because that's effectively what they are. They don't deserve the title of like being leaders in my opinion, and I think a lot of people here on this panel would agree. They're not going to do any of this work. They're not going to facilitate cross-campus solidarity. They're not going to facilitate cross-union cross-union solidarity. They're not going to necessarily take actions or measures rather, to protect their members from retaliation, whatever. I mean, look at what's going on in San Diego right now. Horrible, really horrendous, retaliations happening, and there should be pickets right now surrounding all UC campuses. But nobody's taking nobody in the leadership is taking an action towards that. So that all means, a lot more work on our shoulders, a lot more work on the rank and file shoulders. But the good news is, as we, get our toes wet in these type of, like everything that we expect from the leadership, it's not coming. They're not delivering it, whether it's building infrastructure for communication, whether it's, transparent bargaining, whether it's, taking safety measures during and after the strike against retaliations. We have to do it all our own. But what that means is we don't need any of these people in those positions. And I'm very, very happy to see that a lot of people on this panel have run for office, taken office, and are also like fighting for these type of things on a more of a leadership level. And I'm really, really happy to do that, to see that. I guess one thing that I would like to see, and again, I'm an incoming grad student, so this is a bit of a speculation, and I'm happy to, discuss these things, is that maybe we can try to unify all these efforts statewide. And this panel, I think, is a great opportunity to start off that effort as we get to know each other here, as we discuss these ideas here, with also people watching us right now and who who will be watching us later, as it's a recorded meeting, maybe we can start taking steps towards maybe organizing a statewide caucus that will eventually challenge the current leadership and take over. And not only that, not only putting right people in the right spots, but also we should really start a thinking like institutional framework in normal times, not just in strikes, but especially in the normal times, to like change the structure of the union to make it more accessible, more democratic, more transparent. One thing that I remember from my undergrad years, okay, I will, thank you. One thing from that I remember from my undergrad years is that whenever I went to a union meeting, I wasn't even allowed to ask questions. If I had to ask a question, I would have to raise my hand, make a motion to extend the meeting time, which takes a longer time than the goddamn question itself. And if that was approved, I was then able to ask a question. So all of these things have to change bit by bit. And if we are already talking about these things in meetings like this, we should try to expand this to everyone who was involved during the strike and everyone who are coming in who have heard about the strike, and try to like make it a point to like essentially unify all this effort in an institutional framework. That would be my 2 cents.
Thank you for that. I think this is the perfect segue again to talk about how do we make sustainable organizing choices. You have just spoken, or several people have just spoken about the need for distributing work on other people's shoulders, and the need for cross-campus solidarity. We are already building that. So obviously, since you are just incoming right now, you were probably not super involved in that. But yeah, I agree that something like a caucus seems to be a way to go. And with that, I would like to give it over to Jess and talk a little bit about the other organizing efforts that have kind of sprung up during the strike or were already in place before the strike and have been blossoming since in the realm of mutual aid.
Yeah, so I'll just say, like, I think that going into the strike, like, I think a lot of people have talked about kind of this analysis of power, and like there was a lot of debate about, like, do we have like a really big strike right off the bat and hope that it's short, or do we push for this long haul, right? Like this was kind of the long debate, and I think regardless of kind of like which side people fell on, I think it was like, I don't know, at least to me, very obvious that like, even if you're trying for a short strike, you should make that strike seem like it has, the feet to go as long as it needs to, right? Like that it's a tangible threat of, we're starting our strike and we have the momentum to go for 10, 12, however many weeks that we need to go. And one of the things that kind of like I was realizing, at least, with my campus is, I mean, like, strike pay is never enough, right? Like you just can't survive on strike pay alone. And so if you're trying to like make sure that like people can actually survive as long as possible, right, with the WGA strike, the South, like all of these different strikes, right, like the employer knows that what's going to happen first is you're going to not be able to pay rent and you're not going to be able to afford food, right? So you have to be able to support each other. And one of the things that I was kind of helping to organize at my campus was that there was a group of actually undergraduates who were kind of already forming themselves as like the Radical Student Collective. And I talked to at least a few of them about like, hey, like you have interest, like you've been doing some mutual aid efforts. How would you feel about like, trying to cook for people on the picket lines? Because in my mind, if there's the opportunity, at least for striking workers to go and have not like a fancy, 3-course meal or whatever, but like just maybe some rice and beans for lunch, right? Then they don't have to pay for lunch that day, right? And that's like $10, $15 that they can like, pocket and not have to like spend that on their food, right? And it's actually like I had never done mutual aid before, like not at least to this scale in my life. And I remember like, a couple nights like before the strike was about to begin, I'm like, oh my gosh, like we have to figure out like how many people are we actually expecting at these pickets? How are we getting the food everywhere? And it was kind of a lot. And I was doing like some math, some spreadsheets and everything, had some help with that from a friend. Because we were trying to make sure that we could cook pancakes for everybody. And I was actually surprised at like how cheap it was to like have the capacity to cook like a couple thousand pancakes. Like I ended up getting like a small donation from a family member to go completely towards food, and like didn't even use all of that. And like you can literally just go to Costco and get like a 10-pound bag of just add water pancake mix. And like that will feed a pretty sizable picket line. And it's like not even $10 for like this whole bag. Right. And so I think that like when we're thinking about mutual aid, like it's not as hard as it seems. It takes good coordination, which is a little tricky from time to time, but with enough preparation, with enough like communication to make sure that everyone kind of like understands how the sort of like mutual aid as an organization is operating, who they need to talk to if they have XYZ question, what happens if we have this need at like this particular picket, how do we make sure that we're getting food to all these different picket lines. It takes only a couple, like 1 or 2 people to figure out kind of like the logistics of things and communicating the broader plan to the people involved. And it's a great way to not only ensure that like people can save some of their money that they are not going to be getting enough of from strike pay, but it's also giving other picketers a way to feel like they are involved and giving back to their union. And I think that that is such a crucial part of like having a sustainable strike, is that everyone feels like their own involvement is important. And when you're like there flipping pancakes and then seeing your friend like eating those same pancakes, like there's no way that you're going to be like, oh, I'm just going to quit tomorrow. Like, no, you have to feed people, like, I don't know. It's just, it's wholesome and like does a good thing. And it's not as hard as it seems.
Yeah, Jess just touched on a lot of issues that require robust communication. I think Anthony has to say something about that, especially regarding the recent experience at the Berkeley Anthropology Library, I believe. So please talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for communication specifically, like in the library, we found like motivation to be like a very like important part of this communication, because like if people, it's kind of similar.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about what's the backstory of the Anthropology Library?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, for those that don't know about the Anthropology Library, basically what was happening was the administration wanted to like shut down this library supposedly because of funding, even though they were like building other libraries for like other majors, like a data science and a computer science library. And so what some of us did was we occupied the library after like a certain date in order to keep it. We spent over the night for over 3 months until we like reached an agreement with the university, which was literally like last Saturday. We like reached a final agreement to like keep the library, and they agreed to like have a graduate student work there and take care of it, and also allow the public to retrieve books. Because one of our big messages about the library was to have it public, but also for like students to also access it and just keep it in general. Since I believe only like 2 other universities in the US had like an anthropology library. I think one of them was Harvard. I forgot the other one, but this is like the only university in California that has an anthropology library. And so it was very important for us to keep it. We fought for it because of how many like books were in there regarding diversity, regarding social sciences, which we felt were like being attacked at the time. And yeah, that's just a short snippet of the library. But also to talk about the communication part, something very important we found was like the motivation, which the other person was talking about before. Like the flipping the pancakes and everything, and getting people involved is also like I feel like a form of motivation to get people to keep coming back and keep fighting along with us. I found that through the library, because if people were not like motivated, they would just like end up leaving and just like not come back. But if people were like more motivated about the subject and you're able to like inspire them in order to keep fighting, which is what I feel like this movement has been doing a lot of, like inspiring a lot of people. I know inspired a lot of like undergrads, at least at my university, as you can see with the other person at UC Berkeley who stayed allied with us and becoming a PhD student, I believe, and it was an undergrad before. Definitely like motivation, and also just letting people, at least in our space, like and like inviting people to come, having little events to get people to feel more comfortable to check out the space or check out whatever topic you are fighting for is something very important. And like lastly, what other people were saying was like having scheduled times, like for the library specifically, we had scheduled times for people to sleep in and do like a little bit of cleaning and stuff. And also keeping it hybrid also was very important, because not everyone was able to like participate in person because of how many constraints they had due to like being a parent, jobs, so many different things. And so just keeping them informed throughout the whole movement was just a very important part. And yeah, I believe that's all for me.
Yeah, thank you so much. So with all that in mind, with the mutual aid organizing and the building solidarity through keeping people up to date, through involving them in processes, I want to speak a little bit on the one hand on what I believe our union should do more of, and that is keeping in touch with other unions. I think since there are so many labor struggles going on right now, we are doing a slightly better job than before the strike, just by virtue of the times, these trying times, especially here in Los Angeles. I don't know if that is the case everywhere. But also on the topic of mutual aid, there is a history in union organizing in the US. That's the only one I'm aware of, but I'm sure it's elsewhere too, where unions are more successful when they actually invest in the communities and when they have drives to help community members in specific instances, and union participation goes up in these cases, rather than when they drop that, when union participation then becomes this bureaucratic model, and nobody buys into the vision anymore because nobody in the union is actually following their own ideals. So I think building that kind of solidarity with other unions through mutual efforts is really crucial. And with that, I want to give it over to Andy, who wants to talk a little bit about other points where we as the rank and file also have to be self-critical and where we maybe could improve our organizing for the next whenever.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll keep it quick because I think the questions will be fun. But so basically, I think looking forward to other sort of attempts at sort of robust rank and file sort of movements within sort of these established unions, as Ali was saying, that sort of appear as these sort of bureaucratic giant institutions. I think there's three things that we could maybe keep in mind. I think we need earlier organizing, we need deeper organizing, and we need more independent organizing. So guess I'll start with the earlier organizing. At least the experience at Berkeley was that there were probably only like 5 people who were sort of holdovers from this wildcat moment in 2019 and 2020, who were sort of committed rank and file organizers who are sort of like going through the hell of working through all the process and being sort of shut out the whole time, but really trying to sort of put pressure on to make sure the strike was going to work in this sort of vision that we've been outlining so far at Berkeley, and trying to make that a reality. And so because of that, I think there were some sort of wins, sort of like, I think it's largely because of rank and file organizers or sort of people amenable to this vision were outlining that we got the open-ended strike as opposed to a limited day strike, like 2 to 3 days or something. This was a push early on. But it's also where we got some of the problems that plague the strike, like the 20-hour per week picket shift, like duty for strike pay, right? And so one could imagine that if we had a more robust sort of pushback earlier on, we could have sort of prepared for these things better. So that's one thing to note. And next, I think, is with deeper organizing, right? So we were talking, or I was mentioning before, how we can't just like mobilize people, right? We have to instead, we can't just tell them to go to events, you know, but instead you need to be really organizing individual departments and labs, power mapping them, sort of getting people ready to think critically about how work is done in their own workplaces, what the problems are, how they can be improved, and even how they might sort of, you know, figure out how to maybe conduct labor actions with or without union sanction that could improve the conditions in their workplaces, right? To get them into this critical mindset, not just of how could I run this place better? How could I improve my working conditions? But how could I run a labor action, right? In a way that is not mediated through this sort of institution whose interests are not necessarily my own all the time. And that sort of goes to the more independent organizing, right? Ellen David Friedman has this sort of phrase she says all the time. She's a labor notes sort of editor and sort of voice for like troublemaker organizing, which is, her phrase is, don't look up, look around, right? So it's this idea of not staying fixated on, you know, the decision makers, or staying fixated even on the decision makers within your own union leadership necessarily, right? Like, we could get good people in these same positions, but the structural incentives remain the same for this kind of conciliatory behavior that workers themselves are incentivized to push against, right? So we should think of, I think, or at least this is how I would argue, that the ideal long-term situation should be that rank and file workers should be organized enough to act and think critically together, despite attempts to manage their actions by not only their bosses, but by sort of the union staff, right, who have different sort of incentives than they do. And even like the existing laws, right? Like, we live in a country that is shaped by very, very conservative labor law. There's a lot of things that unions are not allowed to do. And we live with decades of history of conciliatory sort of labor law and labor contracts, right? And so it will not always be the case that rank and file workers can get what they need to get through these existing sort of structures. And this came out in the strike as well, right? There was this constant sort of worry about, like, can we actually block that doorway? Is that legal? Will X or Y happen? Or can we actually do this direct action? Or can we not, right? And I think so it's important to take lessons from, say, the Wildcat in 2020, but also from like the red state teachers strikes, right? Which were not legally sanctioned strikes. So in the long run, I think that should be a goal for rank and file sort of organizers. And in the medium term, I think it's also a problem that we could think about, is that it's difficult for rank and file movements to sustain themselves, not in strikes, right? Because all of the sort of organizing that's done is being done and planned by the union itself, right? Yeah, okay, I'm almost done. So the struggle is, how do we not just hail union initiatives, right? But cultivate this independent self-organization within the rank and file and within our departments. Yeah, so those are my three thoughts on how RNF could set itself up better next time.
Yeah, I think those were pretty good closing remarks. And with that, I would like to go over into questions. And Amy has already posed one in the chat. You feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself afterwards, after I call on you. But I'll start with, or write in the chat. But I'll start with Amy's question. So Amy asks, turnover is high among students. How do we build structures that sustain beyond our own cohorts? And I think part of the answer is to actually institutionalize ourselves as a caucus or something like that. But I'm also asking you all what you think.
Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to jump in on that a little bit. I really, 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 really would love to see this. I understand it would be possible to build some kind of online infrastructure on Unix. And I just wish I knew people who knew how to build that. I mean, I'm sure I do, but I would really like to build something so that folks can communicate this year and 5 years from now, and make contact without being like on a million WhatsApp groups. And I know even with parents, it was great to have the WhatsApp group, but it took a tremendous amount of time to have such a disorganized mechanism. So anyway, that was just what I have to say about, like, I'd like to actually see an infrastructure for cross-campus rank and file communication. That's all.
Yeah, like people are noting, there is the Discord server, which we encourage everyone to join. At Davis, we have our own Discord server as well. We also have one of our newly elected reformer head stewards who is working on, Faith, who's actually kind of here right now, who is working on these educational resources that are like physical documents that we can just be passing out to different departments so that they have something that is like real, that is like, hey, here's how the union works. This is who to email. This is how bylaws work, such and such and such. So yeah, things to work on. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I'm also going to say, for a lot of programs, one of the big issues is that like midway through, people leave because they've qualified and they go off and they do research. That's what happened with me in history. I was in Spain for 2 years from 2019 to 2021. And when I came back, the really radical, wobbly department stewards had left. And it took me like 5 or 6 months to find the union again. And one of the things that we've done since then in the history department is regular town halls, regular OCs, and a steering committee of department stewards. As many of us have said, like, department stewards are not official position holders. They're not, bureaucrats. They're just informally elected within the department. And because we have like 5 of them now. No, I'm sorry. We recently decided that we're all department stewards now. So, building really strong cultures of continuity within departments, I think, is also, and within areas like the arts and humanities on our campus. We're all in the same building, philosophy, lit, Romance languages. So it's easy for us to like just go a couple of floors down and get on the same page.
So,
building off what Matt said, I think, right, in any department that we're organizing, like, I try to find, okay, this is a first year who's really into this stuff, right? Like, even my own department, right? First year is really into it. I'm not going to take over everything, right? I'll be like, they can do some stuff. Like, I'll keep talking to them. So keeping that in mind, right? Like, to, I don't know, identify new people to, like, that you can keep in conversation with even once you graduate. And I already described this in the chat, but after the strike, we started a strike handbook. So it's just like a Google Doc, like a big Google Doc with a bunch of tiny Google Docs linked in it. It's like, here's how you do, like, here's how a strike authorization vote works, right? Like, here's what you do to lead up to a strike. Here's how you organize a picket. Here's how you do construction pickets. Here's how you do delivery pickets. Here's how you do mutual aid, food distribution, all that stuff, right? So, ideally, right, like everybody, like, everyone contributes like based on what they know best. And then a bunch of people can add to each Google Doc. So it's still in the works. It's gotten pretty far, which is nice, but that's kind of a cool thing for like next time a strike rolls around, like even if your food person or your food people have graduated or they've gone to like, like they're not around for that year. All of their knowledge is, documented somewhere.
All right, with that, I would like to go to the next question, Rick.
Oh, thank you. I'm not a UC student. I was really impressed by a lot of what I heard today and your awareness of the problems that you're facing and dealing with, which I think are very common to other unions. I teach at City College of San Francisco. My union is very similar in terms of top down. The leaders know what's best and they don't want to involve the rank and file in terms of making decisions about what we are to do. The question I have is, unless I missed it, I didn't hear any discussion of you're reaching out to undergraduate students who I think are really critical because they're getting screwed by the high tuition and having to take out student loans. And boy, if you could win them over and participate. And I went to the UC Berkeley picket lines a few times. I never really saw much. It seemed to me there weren't much in the way of undergraduate students. So could you address that? Because I think that's really critical to your success. Thank you.
Samantha, you were first.
Yeah, there was actually a lot of undergrad organizing, I think, over at Davis. There was a lot of like pay my TA, like movements and such. And honestly, what I think that we should have done a lot more is really sort of press the undergrads on this because they're the ones that are the bulk of like the UC's tuition, right? And if they're going around and saying, I don't want to sign up this next quarter because everyone's on strike, or I don't even want to be here this quarter because everyone's on strike. Now the UC's losing money, and that can kind of really push us towards a longer strike. That's going to start affecting things like accreditation, which we never even got close to touching during our strike. There's a lot of like back and forth about this. But go ahead.
Yeah, on our campus, we were discouraged by leadership from reaching out to undergrads, that they were reactionary, that they were, just kind of not mature enough to understand what was going on. But literally every undergraduate I talked to, including my former students at that time, because I was on strike, were sending me emails of support, were highly active on social media, on Reddit, TikTok and such. There was a lot of support for that. The flip side of that is that some of the tactics that were employed early on were almost purposefully designed to alienate them. There were groups that were going around, interrupting lectures, that sort of thing, that didn't really take into account their role in this whole process. So that was a huge untapped missed opportunity. And the other one was faculty. We really didn't have a faculty outreach plan. A lot of faculty were under this misapprehension that if they submitted artificial grades on our behalf, then that would actually be doing us a favor somehow. We didn't really understand, but this ties into what I was talking about earlier about, the real misunderstanding of one of our key strengths, which was our withholding of grading and instruction. And I think everything else followed. Why worry about the students and the faculty if we're not worried about grading and instruction withholding?
Jess.
Oh, I don't know that I have too much to add, just that it did like present like a lot of challenges, I think, at UCI, just because like our campus has like a very interesting like dynamic where I think it's just very hard for like graduate students at our campus to really like connect with the undergrads. But I did at least take the opportunity to spread like a few fun facts about the UC on some of my quizzes.
Okay, Ali.
So I am someone who participated in different ways in both 2020, the Wildcat, and the 2022. And in many ways, that was like a lot stronger. Therefore, it was a lot more successful, even though, there were big concessions. But one of the things that was better about 2020 was actually there was a lot more independent, a lot more undergrad support. I can't really speak to as to like why that was the case. And by support, I don't mean just like a feeling of solidarity or this or that support email and whatnot. But I mean, I was an undergrad at that point, and I can tell you that there was a lot more undergrad organizing. In fact, there was a moment, at least on the Berkeley campus, where the undergrads we were pushing the grad students at the time to go on strike, where the UC Berkeley grad students were a little bit more hesitant because it was a wildcat. So that was like one of the weaker compared to the wildcat points of the 2022 strike, in my opinion. And where we can turn towards for like examples as to like how to conduct that, I think is the way folks at UC Santa Cruz handled that situation during the wildcat. They were really, really excellent at that. They were really great at communicating to their undergrads what was happening, why they were withholding their grades, and there was a lot of great opportunities. And one thing I guess that the rank and file can do in situations like that moving forward is that really to encourage their own students, if you're TAing. If not, then maybe there's someone who is, to like really take independent action. Do you want to support us? Well, come up with your own ways. Have fun with it. That's what happened in 2020, and boy, did I have fun. I can tell you that. Really, it's, I think, important to like not only ask for support, but to like really encourage people to take initiative. And it really comes down to, again, as we've been saying, communication.
Just making sure we will probably go over time. Because we also
a motion to extend by 10 minutes.
I just want to say we also have the petition, so I would really like for folks to stick around because we have actual concrete ways how you can support us, but I also don't want everybody to be able to ask their questions. I know that I said we can crunch, but now there are more questions and more responses, so I'm very sorry. Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, I'll be quick, or I'll try. I would recommend everybody read something called After the Fall, Communiques from an Occupied California. It's a wonderful document of the sort of like actions that happened after the 2008 crash and the first onslaught of austerity in the UC system. And the Wildcat is kind of similar to this in the sense that it's so basically like that there are these sort of very large scale, and they not confined in the sort of like business union-y way where it's a sort of like we are doing this for our workers as wage workers. Like legally our union is quite constrained in the demands it can make in terms of transforming the system for undergrads, right? However, the most involved the undergrads have been more of these union or non-union sort of movements within the UC. So there was like an occupation of Wheeler Hall at UC Berkeley, for instance, that was specifically against this austerity that was increasing student tuition and also making grad student lives worse, right? And so this was like equally undergrads and graduate students occupying Wheeler Hall. Not to say that this is maybe like the tactically like be all and end all, but to say that it is we are constrained by the current sort of structure of the union and by like what it regards as like a safe thing that it can demand or what it's able to demand, to have these sort of demands that can sort of unite undergrads and graduate workers in the way that other movements within the UC have done quite successfully in the past. And so that's something we're thinking about when we're thinking about one of the benefits of a sort of independent or a sort of law independent as much as union independent sort of rank and file organizing.
All right. So technically I still have Raj on stack. Anthony withdrew. and then we want to get to Steve's question, and we want to do the petition. So I would say, let's do Raj, let's do the petition, and then let's do Steve's question. Does that work for everybody? Steve, is that okay with you?
Okay.
Or do you, is it?
Well, I was just going to make a comment. I mean, I think, you know,
Steve, there are people on stack. There are people on stack.
I think we should just let Steve go because we've been talking for so long. We've got like 6 people answering every question.
Yeah, I think, you know, right now we're in the biggest strike wave in probably in since my lifetime. And I was involved in the San Francisco State strike in the 60s. The strike wave that's going on now is bigger than what's ever happened in California in modern time. So I think we have to have a united front perspective of uniting the entire working class. What does that mean? Well, one of the things with the students is there should be a demand of the union for open admissions, free admissions for all students. We've got to challenge the corporatization, capitalist structure of the university, which is driving students into poverty, basically. And I think that needs to be a political demand of the union. There should be no admission. There should be free education in California, public education. Now, the union leadership don't want that because they support the Democrats. And the Democrats don't want to attack Gavin Newsom and the billionaires in California who the Democrats represent. That has to be a topic, an issue, I think. Why aren't they calling for free public admission? That would get tremendous support among undergraduates to support the struggle of the UAW members. The other thing is, I think it's important that you try to work to get other unions on the campuses, like Teamsters, like writers, invite them to come to the campus and talk about their issues. I mean, the gig economy. I mean, that's exactly what teachers, faculty are facing in a lot of community colleges. The CSU may be going on strike. Their contract is up and they just raised their fees 5%. You know, so or they're proposing to. So I think we have to have a united front perspective. We have to link up with other education workers. The other thing is AFSCME is fighting for a $25 an hour minimum wage. There should be meetings, joint meetings with that, and united front of all the workers on the campuses with the students. And the union, again, the union bureaucracy does not want that. They don't want to bring all the workers together because they want to keep political control. And if they start to bring all the rank and file together and have assemblies of all the workers, that's dangerous. That's dangerous. So I think you have to have a plan based on building a united front movement, rank and file united front movement, where the membership have the control. And that is opposite to the structure. I was at the rally at Sacramento that was held. I covered that. And it was bizarre because there were like 600 students from all over UC system. They're marching around all over. They get to the Capitol. They spend 15 minutes in front of the Capitol. No demands on Newsom and the legislature. It was like pathetic. Who runs the university? But Newsom and the legislature. They control it. And no demands on them because they didn't want a conflict with the Democratic Party who they support. And I think that's important to keep in mind, like the petition we're going to be talking about, that this guy should be fired, who makes over $1 million for what he did at UCSD. It's part of the failure of the union to really challenge these Democrats and the politicians who run the university for the billionaires. So those are some thoughts.
I mean, those are great thoughts to just lead right into what we want to ask you. So, Matt.
So I am pasting a link here into the chat for a Google document, which has a copy of a proposed resolution, which your panelists here have drafted. This is something that we would love for other union members who are sitting in here to take back to your locals, to your organizing committees, and ideally, you know, vote as a resolution, and then send it back to us so that we can work to facilitate and foster those kinds of really super necessary, as Steve said, terms of solidarity throughout the state. And hey, if you're out of state and you know people from out of state too, UAW is international. We're all international, so send it to them. I'm also going to introduce, I don't know who we ended up agreeing on to share the document calling for Chancellor Coleslaw's resignation, but if you could post that and speak on that, it would be great.
I don't know if we did decide on who was doing that, but I should be able to pull that up. I think just with with Chancellor Coleslaw's like mishandling of the whole situation, the worker intimidation that he's gone after, using UC police forces against workers, kind of bullshit. Coleslaw should have taken that other job offer he got. Yeah, so apparently like his raise was really just to keep him at UCSD instead of going to a different job in a different state. Like, yeah, honestly, like the whole handling of this has just been like really, really bad, and like a clear union busting tactic from the UC. It's a clear intimidation tactic. Like, why else would you file bullshit charges for people writing in chalk if it wasn't just about like intimidating and scaring workers?
Oh, I know, and it's tied exactly into the reason for Coleslaw's raise. The reason that every UC admin loves Coleslaw, and for that matter, the elite bourgeoisie of San Diego love Coleslaw, is because he's an amazing fundraiser, and he rakes in the big billions from the mega donors, not to improve quality of education or pay his graduate workers more, but to build the latest, and greatest of buildings on campus. To a lot, as we all know, UC money is intimately tied in to things like Blackstone or BlackRock or whatever. Blackstone, military fund and defense funding is pouring into campus. So that's his role. And when we had the May 5th alumni event disruption, that really, we hope and we think, really embarrassed him in front of his very wealthy alumni key constituency. So that's our UC San Diego understanding of why the retaliation is so particularly harsh here.
That makes sense. Thanks for sharing that perspective. Yeah, but this is a petition that's like just been started, calling for his resignation, which we feel is, or well, I don't know if I should speak for everybody, but I certainly think that, he should resign. And I think a lot of people here would probably agree.
Yeah, he should get the hell out. UC President Drake should resign, says someone. I agree. I think they all should go, and their salary should be like really
reduced. Got a
reduced.
massive pay raise.
Joe Biden should resign. I mean, yeah.
Collectivize the UC.
Oh man.
Yeah, no, you see, like President Drake's like pay raise was $890K, but that's because like the president before him was Janet Napolitano, who oversaw the Wildcat strike and the use of like the firing the workers, the use of military surveillance technology. She was only making like less than $600K a year. I think it was like 550 or something. And so Drake comes in and they're like, well, we got to bump up his salary so it's like comparable to what he was making at Ohio State. And so they gave like over a 50% raise to the presidency when he came in.
I mean, all of these people are already multimillionaires when they come
right in. And
right?
get a free mansion.
This isn't money that like they need for, I mean, nobody needs that kind of money, right? But like, especially not these people.
I mean, Napolitano was the governor of Arizona at one point, and she was the head of the Homeland Security Department. I mean, she's vicious. And what's up with UC like hiring all these, sort of people, honestly?
For those of you who click on the petition, or even just look up Pradeep Khosla on Wikipedia, and you'll see like all of the terrible things that he's done with DARPA, with drone warfare, with, I mean, he sits on like 15 different boards. He's bad news.